Hello, everyone. I already see some people joining. We will start soon. I will just wait maybe a couple minutes for the majority of the audience to join. Hello, hello, everyone. I will just give it a few more minutes. Hello. Maybe waiting 1 minute more to make sure everyone has the time to log in. Okay, cool. I'd say we start, and then while I keep, I intro the webinar, for sure there will be more people joining, but hopefully by the time we start the discussion, most people will have joined. Okay, really nice to see you all, attending this webinar. The topic today is about the future of ESG assurance, and what we're going to tackle is a very interesting look at what this field will look like in the next maybe 3, 5, or 10 years. With a specific look at regulations. So what's happening, there is an increase in ESG regulations worldwide. That's, of course, creating a greater need for ESG assurance and auditing services, and just driving demand in this specific field, which, of course, is very interesting. And then on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of new technologies, and specifically AI, but other forms of digitization that can help both auditors and, of course, also businesses getting more prepared for the upcoming regulatory requirements that they will face. So I'm Carla, and I will be moderating this webinar today. Before getting started, I just wanted to share some rules or some information just for you to know. So the webinar will be recorded, and I will share the recording afterwards on the Briink YouTube channel. So you will be able to access the recording from there. If you registered, as you should have done, to this webinar, you should also receive the recording later from me in an email. So also if someone from your organization hasn't had the chance to actually attend, they will be getting the recording, so they will be able to rewatch everything. The last 15 minutes of this webinar will be dedicated to your questions. So maybe you prepared some questions you already had in mind for our speakers, or this might come naturally during the course of our conversation. There is a Q&A section within the Zoom webinar interface, so not the chat, but the Q&A, and you're free to leave your questions there. And in the last 15 minutes, I will pick some of the questions for our speakers to answer. There might be some questions that we won't have time to cover during the webinar. It's okay. Maybe we take those offline with you. We can, of course, engage after the webinar over those specific questions. And finally, if you have any other question that comes up after, that is perfectly normal. Feel free to reach out to me. That's my email. You can take a screenshot, or, it's pretty straightforward, carla@briink.com. Or you can also reach out to our speakers if you want to. Maybe before starting, I wanted to say a few words about Briink. So we are the ones behind this webinar, and so maybe it's fair to share a couple things about ourselves. So we are a Berlin-based startup which is pioneering AI technology and LLM power technology to help companies more easily extract, verify ESG data or sustainability data and KPIs, which usually come in a very unstructured format. So for example, in documents, websites, etc. So we use this technology to kind of extract this data, and we think our technology could be very useful also for auditors or for businesses who want to prepare for future ESG reporting requirements, as this technology will help them really extract and verify more easily the ESG KPIs that are usually reported, for example, in ESG reports or on statements that are published on websites. I left a QR code that's just for you if you want to try our platform, which is free to access. You can, of course, do that. We also have a website, so feel free to visit that for more information. And yeah, this is an overview of our tools right now that we have available on the platform. Yeah, we are quite early stage, so we're still developing and improving on some of these tools. But broadly speaking, with our technology, you can basically analyze any document and extract ESG KPIs at scale. You can also perform policy gap analysis to find potential gaps in your company policies. If you're an auditor, you can use that to verify that a company policy is complete or that a document is not missing any info. So yeah, that's just yeah, quick overview of what we are, who we are, what we do, and where we come from. And of course, because we engage with this topic quite a lot, it's super interesting for us to dive a little deeper in what it means to be in the ESG auditing or sustainability auditing industry today, what it means to strive for more digitization of this industry. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation with our speakers, panelists. Yeah, I wanted to thank you for joining this and kind of driving this or giving us more insights into what the future of this ESG assurance field looks like. And I would like to do a little round of introductions, if it's okay for you. So yeah, we have today here Patrick Hegarty, who's the VP EMEA at AssuranceLab. So maybe Patrick, I will start from you. What do you do at AssuranceLab? Who is AssuranceLab? And yeah, how do you envision maybe a few words about what you're excited about to talk about in this webinar?
Thank you, Carla, and thank you everyone for joining. I'll start maybe with what is AssuranceLab, and then I'll go into my own kind of background maybe. So AssuranceLab are a Sydney-based audit and compliance company, very much powered by technology. Our primary focus kind of initially was around privacy and security, and more we're starting to collaborate and work with clients kind of in the sustainability space. We see a natural kind of evolution as we look at some of those risk-based kind of controls frameworks and kind of how we support clients there. Similar to Briink, we're a certified B Corp. We're very proud of that. We're about 50 employees, 400 plus clients, and one other kind of just from a people side, very proud of kind of the people that we have in the services team and the team more broadly. 2023, we won Startup Employer of the Year for Australia. So really kind of keen from that perspective of our purpose too. Myself, I'm in AssuranceLab kind of relatively new. I joined 6 weeks ago as the VP of EMEA, although I was on the advisory board from their inception, so going back years before that. Before this, though, I started my career working in PwC within the risk and audit team. But spent the last 7 years working in Accenture in their global center for R&D and innovation here in Ireland, where I led their sustainability portfolio. So working with large corporates as they look around, kind of as we look to support their sustainability priorities. More and more in the last year or two with Accenture was in that kind of ESG readiness, double materiality space. So really looking forward to this and getting into the topic with Carmen and Tomas and everyone else.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. And of course, we also have here Carmen Auer. She's Partner Sustainability Services at BDO Germany. So another reality, a large auditing company. Carmen, it would be super nice if you, like Patrick, could tell us a little bit more about what your department does. And yeah, how do you envision this conversation kind of developing?
Sure, thanks for having me, and hello everybody. So my name is Carmen Auer, partner at BDO. I'm heading the sustainability department together with another colleague. So BDO is a large auditing and advisory company, and the sustainability department within that company is, on the one hand, providing advisory services to clients, and those are mainly related at the moment to the regulation which is out there. So CSRD, EU taxonomy, supply chain due diligence act, CSRD, whatever you name it now, what's out there with regard to regulation, we are currently advising our clients on that. On the other hand, we are an audit company, so we are also providing assurance on sustainability information. And this is probably one of the important topics here today. Providing limited or reasonable assurance on mandatory or voluntary reports. Personally, I'm with BDO now for 3 years. I've been with KPMG before for more than 10 years, and I've always been in the field of sustainability. So advising clients, providing assurance on, I think, more than over 100 reports by now. This so much to my background. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today, because I think bringing those perspectives we represent here together is very important for the whole adventure we are all going on.
Amazing. Great. And I think what you mentioned about all of these soup of acronyms and new regulations coming up, that's very much relevant for what we will be talking a little bit here here today. Last but not least, we have also Tomas van der Heijden. He is, of course, the CEO and co-founder of Briink, my company. So I'm really happy to have you here, Tomas, today. And same as the others, if you could say a few words about yourselves and Briink, maybe a little bit.
Yes, thanks, Carla. Thanks for the introduction, and also I'm really looking forward to the webinar today. So I think as Carla already mentioned, at Briink, we are an AI startup. We're based in Berlin, and our core focus is around building AI technology solutions for the growing volume of ESG document and audit work that has been emerging, in particular in Europe, because of new regulations like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, as Carmen mentioned, also the Supply Chain Act here in Germany, and of a growing volume of other voluntary frameworks that are putting a lot of pressure on companies, on suppliers, on audit and assurance teams to start to collect and make sense of a very big and voluminous and complex new world of ESG data and document disclosure requirements. Just a couple of words on myself. So I'm, of course, the co-founder and CEO of Briink. In my pre-Briink life, I've built a legal tech AI startup in the US, and also worked as a corporate lawyer in the renewable energy space for several years. And so I'm very excited to be speaking today and joining the webinar, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Tomas. And now I will stop sharing and we will delve directly into the discussion. Great. First off, as I anticipated before, the topic of this webinar is talking broadly about the future of the assurance field with a special focus on ESG. And I think we touched on this already in introductory round, but Carmen, I wanted to learn from you, because I think you are the one with a lot of expertise in the ESG advisory and in the ESG, or you have a good overview of the ESG assurance space. How is this field actually evolving? How has it been evolving in the past years? And what are, you think, the main drivers behind the change that is happening currently in the field?
So we've definitely seen an increase in the demand of ESG assurance over the last years. So if we look back 10 years ago or so, then only a few companies sought assurance on sustainability information, and it was mainly out of intrinsic motivation. And then the first big wave of assurance came with the non-financial reporting directive here in Europe, where it became mandatory for a large listed entities to report on sustainability. So the reporting became mandatory, not the assurance. But many supervisory boards asked also for assurance from their auditor. So definitely the the first or the main driver for this change in the demand is the regulation, clearly, and the regulation is also the driver which will bring this huge increase in sustainability assurance, because, and we mentioned the regulation already, the CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which came into effect from this year on, from 2024 onwards, with a step-by-step approach for different companies. But this regulation will also not only demand mandatory reporting, but will also demand mandatory assurance on this information. So there will be just a very huge increase in the demand. I mean, there are other drivers. If you look at the financial sector or the capital market, so what we see is that ESG KPIs become more and more relevant for funding, for margins, for credits, and of course then the banks also want assurance on those KPIs. But yeah, regulation definitely by far the main driver here.
Yeah, and Carmen, maybe as a follow-up question, what is in your experience, because I think that's sometimes something that is interesting or that businesses do not necessarily think about, but what is the main difference between financial assurance and ESG assurance in the way maybe the processes work? I mean, I know there is quite a lot of complexity when it comes to ESG data. They're quite different from financial data or traditional financial data. Yeah, what do you see as the big difference and maybe also as the big challenge there?
Yeah, so looking at the assurance process or audit process as such, the difference is not so big. So the big difference is in the subject matter, of course, but if we look at the procedures we are performing in an assurance or in an audit, then that's quite similar whether we are auditing financial information or non-financial information. So we are performing substantive procedures where we're looking for proof documents, and we are performing analytical procedures like trend or ratio analysis. We do things like interviews, reviews, recalculation, reperformance, and that's very similar whether you audit the financial information or non-financial information. But yet the subject matter as such is very different, and sustainability information often requires a special knowledge or some know-how for the subject matter. So to give a couple of examples where the difference really sticks out for me is if we look, for example, on the topic of materiality. And here I'm not talking about the double materiality, which we need in order to come to our most material topics, but the materiality in terms of when is an error in a report material. And if we look at financial reporting, then that's very easy to determine because every information or nearly every information in the report is in the same unit. It's euros, it's in dollars, whatever. So we have the same unit, and we can determine materiality in a very holistic way because every single information is measured in the same unit. And if we look at sustainability information, we have CO2, we have kilowatt hours, we have liters, we have full-time equivalents. So we have many different units. So just the fact of determining when do I have a material error in my assurance, and we need to have a different materiality for every single information. So that's very different. And yeah, especially when we look at the challenges, that's very much related to the way sustainability information is currently collected. So if we look at financial reporting, it has a long history. It's evolved over a very long time, and we have IT systems where information has automatic controls in there and so on. So that's a process which is very well established. And this is not the case for sustainability yet. So the maturity of the reporting process is very different. And here, of course, also lies the challenge in the assurance, and that makes the assurance of financial and non-financial information very different because we have many different sources, many different files, unstructured information, and everything needs to be brought together in the assurance process. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's super interesting. And of course, also part of the challenges we see at Briink, of course, in all like managing this large amount of unstructured information, and of course, making sure that those metrics are as gathered as possible to the specific materiality assessment of the company. Yeah, but before maybe diving a little bit more into the CSRD, I wanted to actually ask to Patrick, because we talked about broadly like processes in the assurance auditing world. They kind of, like Carmen was just saying, they kind of look, are very standardized. I know your company uses a particular multi-framework approach to auditing. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that means for your clients, and how can that help with their compliance journey?
Yeah, and even I loved the way Carmen described the simplicity of the kind of unit versus kind of you're using kind of numeric versus now going into a world of kind of non-financial audit. For AssuranceLab, we are exclusively a non-financial auditor. And what does that mean? So we kind of look at in this world of complexity and where it's harder to quantify, we would consider ourselves as experts in kind of the control, implementation, and audit. So what are some of these kind of risk-based controls that we can look at within an organization to ensure an audit and to ensure that those controls are operating effectively? What we find, and we started a number of years back, primarily within security, another topic area that is, again, is very hard to kind of limit to one particular unit. And so we started to work within different standards around what are some of the priority controls that you can bring into an organization to ensure that the risk of fraud and kind of to reduce those kind of vulnerabilities. And the way in which we've seen this progress for clients is security is obviously and has been a huge priority for some time. We now see, and more recently, we see privacy, kind of how companies are handling data. We see GDPR in Europe as a huge priority area over the last number of years for clients. So what we did and have become kind of really comfortable doing is, where do we see some of those overlapping controls when we think about data monitoring, data capture between, say, security and privacy, and how can we identify efficiencies in those? And you'll be very surprised to know that in some cases there are considerable overlap. So if we can get comfort over your security environment through the controls that you have in place, and we bring in kind of, and when I say multi-framework, we say a framework for security or multiple frameworks for security, now going into frameworks for privacy, can we start to blend those frameworks to really reduce the burden on clients who are becoming audit ready? More in the last kind of year or two, sustainability is now kind of coming in very much and becoming a priority for organizations. So another multiple frameworks, as Carmen just mentioned there, from a sustainability perspective, even pre-CSRD, pre-ISSB, how do we start to kind of look at that as a centralized framework approach and look at the audit as a centralized view? For us, most of our clients are not kind of falling within the mandatory threshold requirements of CSRD at the moment. I think I mentioned we've got 400 plus clients. Most of them would currently sit outside of the requirements for CSRD or some of the other incoming standards over the coming years. Less than 250 people for probably 75% of them, and a lot of them operating exclusively outside of Europe. The really, though, I would say positive and refreshing thing to see is still so many of those kind of execs in the smaller companies that are on that kind of scale and growth are really keen to embed some of the core principles of those incoming standards, despite the fact that they're not mandatory. So I was speaking to the CEO of a European-based company kind of within the 25 to 50 person headcount last week. And again, kind of falling outside the threshold, security is a primary focus for them at the moment, privacy. But in doing that kind of early preparation, very keen to start to embed some of the controls and some of the practices around the sustainability standards into their growth at this point. Again, kind of how do we do this? So you could imagine, if you think about multiple frameworks as we described, this is a very manual process, and it's probably unachievable if you were to look at it through that lens alone, as well, given the fact that the stakeholder responsible for security versus sustainability within an organization is likely a different person. So for us, we're doing this through technology. So we have our own proprietary audit technology, which kind of houses these frameworks, and we're starting to bring in new frameworks as new frameworks become a priority for our clients. And that looks then at the kind of assessment of those overlapping controls. It starts to identify where do clients need to kind of start to think about additional controls that might sit outside of that kind of overlapping approach. And then it's how do we continually monitor that? How do we support the client in kind of tracking that? How do we support the client in reporting that? And we do that through our own centralized system. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Thank you. It was actually covering the other question that I wanted to ask is kind of how do you see sustainability developing when it comes to your offering of assurance services? Because, I mean, ESG now encompasses a lot of non-financial risk, not only sustainability risks. And I think all of these, data regulation and also sustainability regulation will kind of come together ultimately, maybe in a more unified framework. But maybe before diving a little bit deeper in the technology side you were mentioning, I wanted to go back to Carmen and ask her about this CSRD that we have been touching on. So exactly what is happening with the CSRD? You said there is still no mandatory need for the assurance is still non-mandatory, but the regulation is still expanding. Can you explain a little bit where you see the largest impacts for both auditors and companies in the next few years?
So with the CSRD, the assurance will become mandatory. So under the NFRD we had so far, it wasn't, but now it definitely will become mandatory. And the number of companies which will have to report is increasing so much. So under the old regulation, and I know the numbers for Germany now a bit better, we had 500 companies which would fall under this directive. And with the CSRD now, we will have 15,000. So the sheer number of companies who have to report on sustainability and which have to get assurance on that is increasing by large. And one other big change the CSRD brings is that we, for the first time, we have a uniform standard which all companies need to use. And now I bring in another abbreviation. So the standards are the ESRS, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And before, the companies could choose which framework they want to use, and many used standards like the GRI, which are well known and which are making reports comparable. But now we are going to have the ESRS, so it's big goal is, of course, comparability then if everybody is using the same standard. So for me, the big impact the CSRD will have is that it will bring sustainability reporting to the same level as financial reporting. And so we get a more holistic view of a company. And I would even say in an ideal world, we are not talking about financial reporting or ESG reporting. We are talking about a holistic company reporting. And so I think that the CSRD definitely helps to bring that to that level. And I mean, after all, it's about transparency. So the CSRD is not like prescribing you have to bring down your emissions to that level or you have to have this and this. The CSRD wants transparency, and you need to report transparently on what's your current status and maybe what are your targets. But if you don't have something, be transparent about it. And this whole notion of transparency will hopefully lead to everybody being able to making better management decisions in the end. So that's what I hope for. What will the CSRD have as an impact?
As a spontaneous follow-up question to that, I mean, this is impacting mainly European businesses, but also non-European businesses to some extent, right? And how does it fit into the broader, let's say, ESG regulations landscape, like the global landscape? Not sure if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. So the companies who will be affected at first are, of course, the European ones. But from 2028 onwards, the CSRD also looks at companies who are having a certain revenue within the EU, but are not headquartered in the EU. So they will also fall under this directive. The way they will need to report on and to what extent, I mean, that's still a bit open. But definitely it will have an effect on also, outside of the EU. At least also because of the fact there are many international companies in the EU who have daughter companies around the world, and we are looking at a group report. So if I have a daughter company in the US, this will have to feed the same information into the group report. So there's definitely an outside impact also out of Europe. And of course, what we see with the ISSB and the IFRS standards around the world, there is a development, and of course it makes sense that there's a certain alignment on these. I mean, the CSRD and the ESRS are probably at the moment the most comprehensive one, go deeper than the IFRS sustainability standards are going at the moment. But yeah, there's a lot going on in the worldwide area with regard to ESG regulation, and I think we need to bring it together somehow.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big topic, like this whole standardization topic. I wanted to actually ask maybe again to Patrick. Not sure if you can share a little bit more about the data standardization side of things. So yeah, we see that there are of course different data that one needs to collect, even outside of sustainability in other frameworks. And do you think, is that a challenge that your clients face? Is that something you help with? Or yeah, what have you seen in the market so far?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think maybe even just continuing kind of where Carmen went, I think overall the consolidation in standards from what we're seeing within sustainability has been received as a very positive thing from all stakeholders. If I go back kind of pre-COP26 2021, where at that time it was very much kind of a case where organizations could report against a standard that they deemed fit, which meant at the time it was very hard to look at any one company kind of against each other, because there was this world where you were almost just doing it based on the standard that more neatly fitted your business, which and back then kind of benchmarking was a very kind of key objective for clients who were looking to communicate their sustainability progress to say shareholders or investors or indeed even consumers. I think the fact that we're seeing consolidation under ISSB and CSRD and that now is a net positive for all stakeholders. I also think though it presents a really interesting opportunity, and I'll get to where we're going with this, for companies themselves and employees within that company who are looking to, of course, stay out of trouble with the regulator. I mean, that will be a core focus for anyone and always should be. But I think with sustainability specifically, we're starting to see people within the organization look at these regulations as something much more than just staying out of trouble. So how are they going beyond compliance, or how are they building in some of the kind of core principles of these regulations to go beyond compliance for their business? And this both kind of is to how do they mitigate the reputational risk, how do they capture kind of new consumer groups, how do they start to kind of appeal to different financing or to new kind of sustainable financing, as if they can demonstrate that progress. For us, then it's a case of helping them do this. And it's very hard to do this unless you have the necessary data points and the way in which you kind of start to track and monitor and report on that becomes kind of very centralized from the data piece. And that's where I go back to the software that we're using, but not just us, other companies are using other types of software and third-party software that's out there to say, okay, can we start to pull in our CO2 data? Can we start to pull in all of the water usage kind of data in to then be able to report? So I think those data platforms will be absolutely and already are absolutely critical in kind of helping clients get up to really kind of progress their compliance journey. From us, then, like as I said, we aren't operating explicitly within sustainability reporting. So it's how do we start to and we have some, I guess, deep partnerships with some technology players who operate more in that kind of across the enterprise. So how are they looking at your cloud infrastructure? How do they look at your coding infrastructure? How do they look at now kind of your product and everything? And we are seeing a natural evolution of those data platforms to go into now kind of monitoring kind of your supply chain, and within your supply chain, how are they going out kind of and pushing into that kind of scope, your scope 2, scope 3 reporting requirements as well from a sustainability perspective.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I should just make it very clear. I mean, we as much aren't the data platform, and we are the auditor of the information. So we're working with those strategic partners and starting to get kind of the depth of experience of their data platform so that we can audit it more efficiently. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, we have our own then accelerators and tools through our AI audit tools that kind of will sit in between those two layers to really just kind of boost efficiency and improve quality of the audit.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I think that's a seamless segue into this next question, which would be exactly about AI. And I would turn to Tomas for that question. So when it comes again to ESG, sustainability assurance, we've talked a little bit about the company side, the business side, but what are some of the challenges that you believe based on, you're speaking with auditors every day that they are facing. So the auditors, the assurers, where you think AI could really help. How are you thinking about that at Briink?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think there's a few topics there that are critical. I think they were already touched on also by Carmen and Patrick. I think the first is probably that a lot of this sustainability audit work and the data that needs to be collected is fairly new. So unlike, for example, in financial auditing or financial reporting, a lot of this data is sort of scattered around. It's quite unstructured, right? It hasn't really been formally put into the right structures for sustainability reporting before. And as a result, in particular, larger companies or large audit firms, one of the big challenges they're dealing with right now is kind of making sense of this large volume of unstructured information, right? How do you take all of this data that a company might have already collected or all the documents that it might have already generated and identify whether or not there's the requisite information that's needed, for example, for a CSRD audit? So that's one of the challenges that currently exist. And I think in particular, when you look at the CSRD and for anybody that's looked at the ESRS Excel file, which has about 1,200 KPIs, it's quite a voluminous amount of potential KPIs that might be applicable to you. So if you're, for example, a large company in Europe, or you have a complex supply chain, the number of KPIs that might be material to your company might be in the hundreds, right? So you're dealing with quite a few different data points that need to be collected and then audited and verified. Added to the challenge as well is that a lot of the KPIs are not just quantitative, they're qualitative or narrative-based disclosures, right? So, companies might be asked, for example, to provide information with respect to, their climate risk policies, for example, right? And it's not just about providing, some financial metrics or some financial numbers about your revenue or CapEx, OpEx, but there's a whole element around describing what are you as a company doing with respect to your climate risks, your climate engagements, your decarbonization strategies. And a lot of that information is, as I mentioned, it's narrative based. It's qualitative based information. It's also information that, by the very nature of it being sustainability information, is likely exists in many different departments within your organization, right? You're dealing with stakeholders in many different parts of the business. You're dealing with a lot of data, I think, as Carmen already mentioned, that is quite wide in scope, right? I mean, you're looking at water emissions, CO2 emissions, you're looking at human rights policies. It's quite a vast, different array of information that needs to be collected and verified and audited, which creates a lot of challenges for companies, and where I think technology, and in particular artificial intelligence technology, can come in to kind of support on a lot of that work.
Yeah, that's of course interesting, and I think it's what our kind of hypothesis is at Briink, right? That you can take all of this data and push for more standardization with these new technologies. I wanted to go back to Carmen to ask to her, like, from the perspective of a large auditor, are you actually integrating any of these technologies, or are you thinking about integrating any of these technologies in your current processes or systems? Even if it's not something you're doing today, how do you think about it for the future?
Yeah, so definitely technology, and especially AI, will be a very important aspect going forward. So on the one hand, of course, it's helpful for the client using it, getting more structure into it, because if we then come as an auditor and look at all this information, if it comes out of a system, if it has a clear change log, if it has controls which are documented and so on, of course, our audit can be much more efficient. So it can, on the one hand, help us, technology can help us in the audit process if the client is using it. On the other hand, we can also use it in the audits. And let's be honest, the demand of capacities the audit profession is facing to, in Germany, provide assurance on 15,000 company reports. And we have that around Europe, it's going to be 50,000. So the demand of capacities of actually doing the assurance, the audit, is so huge. And I think the key in being able to do that is technology and AI. We need to leverage that. Otherwise, we won't be able to do this the assurance on so many reports. I mean, it's not the only aspect, but it's definitely a very important one. So yes, BDO is thinking about these aspects, and we are talking with our clients to that. We are talking internally on that, and I think it will be a key factor in going forward, definitely.
Yes, and Patrick, I know AssuranceLab works, as I think Carmen touched a little bit on the business side of things. So businesses also need to look at these technologies. And I know AssuranceLab works with, larger businesses, but also relatively smaller businesses and scale-ups. How are you thinking about the role of technology in supporting these kind of smaller companies in their assurance journey? Is that something that you learned along the way? I mean, you just joined AssuranceLab. So I'm not sure if that's a question you can answer, but how are you thinking about it in general? How can technology also support these relatively smaller businesses?
Yeah, and I think that's really kind of what where our focus is, and I might be able to give better examples if I take say security, but before jumping in, I'll say I look at kind of the evolution of the kind of sustainability data space over the last number of years, and Tomas will know this very well. And you think for a long time we were hitting that kind of ceiling, which just goes into the maturity of clients, where companies like MSCI and ESG Book and S&P and that were capturing information for kind of in and around 12,000 companies, which were companies that were publicly reporting data. How can they use different kind of crawler and scanning kind of technologies to start to extract information from those publicly facing companies to really kind of paint a picture? But that picture was still very limited, and as Carmen mentioned, we're talking about within CSRD, we're not just talking about publicly traded companies here, so we're going well beyond that number, and 50,000 is the number that people are talking about. And I think the technology here, there's a question around the technology, because for smaller companies, they won't have necessarily the ability to push out in the same way, and we think much smaller companies may not be investing in the technology in the same space. So it's more around kind of how do we motivate companies to really kind of engage in this data exchange and ecosystem. And if I look kind of the last year or two, we've really started to see companies look at this differently. And if I think about ESG reporting, not specifically within any standard, there are companies who have now, one example is a company, actually a European company, which took that kind of 12,000 and massively exploded it out and very quickly got reporting information on 150,000 plus companies. So getting into the much less mature companies, and they did that in a way kind of really leveraging the vendor network. So putting their platform in place with large enterprise, and then having the large enterprise push out to their supply chain to say, okay, in order to work with us, you now need to be part of the supply chain. You need to upload the relative information across our platform. And then that was less of a technology, but it was more of almost like a business model type innovation, in terms of we can now kind of, you want to work with us, you need to give us this information, and it massively goes deeper into the less mature organizations. For us, then, it's and I think where I'm going with this is more, how do we work with, and very conscious of the clients that we work with, some of them aren't of that side. How do we work with them in terms of what are the more feasible technology innovations that will allow them kind of capture the necessary information for them to kind of, if they need to, if it's mandatory to become compliant, if it's not mandatory, still though to kind of meet those compliance objectives of the firm or of some stakeholders who they're working with. So we are always partner first. As Carmen mentioned, it helps the audit process. It gives integrity to the audit process if you can rely on system enforced control. So within when I apply the security side of it, we have 2 or 3 very mature automated compliance platforms within security that do daily testing on kind of different vulnerabilities, and we then come on top of that to audit that which gives us more confidence in the audit, increases the quality, and it kind of reduces the time it takes to actually do the audit. But I think what we're most excited about then is working with those technology partners, and I would see Briink as a huge opportunity here as well, to then kind of see the auditors can still bring in a technology in terms of and a level of automation into how they do the audit. So yes, we're talking about platforms that are kind of around the data gathering and data monitoring, but for the auditor themselves, we are very much of the opinion we shouldn't just sit and stand still and rely on the kind of third party data providers or partnership ecosystem. So we very early as an auditor invested very heavily in a product team, and you would wonder, why do we invest in a product team when we're a services company? And for us, the product, and I use product, but it's more kind of tooling now, and we've got our AI software which we work with our partners, and for us, for the more mature frameworks that we're very used to, we are taking that audit process for a client who is ready, and we're running through the first run of that audit in 140 seconds. And we're seeing 60%, perhaps 70%, 80% in some cases of audit passes for clients who are on a third-party system or multiple kind of third-party systems. So if the information is there and if they're monitoring it, can we remove some of the workload of the audit and the querying back and forth and the evidence gathering through our AI technology? And we're seeing huge progress in a short amount of time in this space. And from all of our clients, it's a very exciting, I suppose, it's an exciting development, as the audit process can sometimes be quite cumbersome and time consuming for the clients, especially the clients of the size that we're operating.
Yeah, and I mean, I think your points make us think about another topic, which is very important when we talk about AI, technology, but specifically about AI, which is there are some misconceptions around the usage of AI or automation in fields like auditing, assurance, legal, sustainability, because of course, these fields are highly regulated. We're dealing with regulations, they need precision. So I feel like a lot of people have concerns, and I will actually going back to Tomas, like, how do we approach this at Briink? So first of all, how do we ensure that the AI system is accurate, that can give accurate insights that are easily verifiable, so you can have a human in the loop in the process, and you don't just delegate everything to the AI? Yeah.
No, I think that's a great question. I think it's a very important question. So if we think about the ESG audit workflow, right? The one that I think Carmen touched on as well. High level, what that looks like, right? You have these massive new ESG frameworks and KPI requirements, right? That allow you to collect a bunch of information as a company, and that could be then a variety of documents that need to be then shared with an auditor. And the auditor needs to go through those documents and verify whether the information matches the KPIs that are material to that company, right? Just from a high level perspective. I think AI is a really good tool that can be used by the auditors to help them, accelerate the analysis of the information that is in those documents, or maybe also identify where there are gaps, right? Where the company might have not disclosed something, or maybe they don't have information with respect to a certain topic that needs to be further investigated. In that workflow, you can start to embed AI, right? That's something that we at Briink specialize in, right? Using AI, using large language models to help do that, help the auditor do that screening of those documents and see what's in there to verify whether or not it matches to the KPIs. But what I think is really important to mention is that in this workflow, but also in a lot of AI workflows in general, I think we should be very careful about talking about 100% automation versus talking about AI as a tool for the auditor to use within their audit workflow, right? There always needs to be a human in the loop element, right? The AI is essentially a tool, one of many tools that the auditor uses to find the information it's looking for. But ultimately, it's up to the auditor to go in and verify that the information that was identified by the AI system is actually in the document, right? So the way that we think about it is building AI tools that can be used within an ESG audit workflow is essentially about how do you integrate an AI system with a human audit analyst workflow, right? How do you build it in such a way that the auditor can easily verify what's in what the AI came up with, right? So how do you provide, for example, source references, right? So not just an AI generated answer with no reference to where it's being pulled from, but where does it actually, where in the page, you know, is this being pulled from page 9 of the, you know, human rights policy, or is this just something that the AI made up and hallucinated, right? So it's very important that you always tie the AI results back to an actual underlying source reference that you could verify. And this is the type of interaction between AI systems and humans that I think is very critical within the ESG space, right? I think at the end of the day, it would be completely counterintuitive if you use an AI system within ESG and it created a bunch of hallucinations that were not verified in the underlying information. So I think this aspect of really thinking about AI systems not as, hey, I'm going to use it for 100% automation of my audit workflow, but rather I'm going to use it as a tool to help me do more of this work more effectively. I think that's how we think about it at Briink.
Amazing. I think it's almost time for the audience questions. But before that, I actually wanted to do something. I wanted to ask all of you one question, if you could answer in just one sentence, because the topic, you know, the title of this webinar is about the future of sustainability assurance, ESG assurance. So what I wanted to ask you, if you could name one challenge and one opportunity that you see in this field in the next happening in the next 5 years. So one challenge and one opportunity. I don't know who we could start. Maybe we could start from you, Tomas, since you just spoke. One challenge and one opportunity you see in this field.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that Patrick also touched on earlier. Well, I think one of the big challenges that I think I foresee is that for a lot of companies, especially the long tail of companies that are smaller, that will fall under the expanded scope of the CSRD in the coming years, or that are within the supply chain of a large company that falls under the CSRD, they're just not going to have a lot of this information, right? They haven't collected this information before. There aren't actually documents in place at the moment that prove any of these CSRD KPIs, for example. And so one of the big challenges that you see now is like, great, you know, let me go and collect all the CSRD information about this company, but what if this company has no CSRD information to begin with? I think that's a big challenge right now in terms of like you getting a really good picture in terms of the sustainability profile of a company that you're looking at or that you are auditing. I think it creates potentially also an opportunity down the road for or can be AI technology can become an opportunity also down the road for those types of companies, right? You can start to build AI solutions that help those companies actually figure out how to generate these documents, this information in the first place, right? So not just talking about document extraction, but actually talking about document generation, helping companies actually have the tools that they can figure out how do they actually start to develop the right policies, the right frameworks, the right methodologies. When the auditor then comes around and asks it for some information, they actually have the ability to start to collect and generate that information.
Patrick, to you now, one challenge and one opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for the short term will be the implementation and the cost. And for the larger organizations, that's multiplied kind of significantly again. So I think the implementation and the cost of this in the short term is significant. But I do believe for the opportunity outweighs that kind of pain point and challenge in the longer term. You would have to believe and hope that the kind of EU directive is promoting, and other kind of regulators are looking to push out this for the greater interest of the companies and society. And I genuinely believe this. For us, again, nobody comes to us because it's mandatory. They come to us because they want these kind of principles in place. If I think about a CFO recently who I spoke to, who was the person coming to us, it's really kind of how do we provide them with the principles at the start to empower them to then think about the decisions that they're making around kind of growth in a more sustainable way, for him, it was to put him as more of a strategic advisor amongst his peers when we think about where they're investing for growth. So I think there is that opportunity where companies, when they embed these principles for over the coming kind of 6 months, year, that they will be then better placed to make sustainable decisions and investment into sustainable kind of capex and more kind of in everything that they do, that it both kind of leads them to being a better business. It leads them to being a more sustainable business, not just from the traditional sense, but also sustain themselves into the future. And then I think everyone kind of benefits around that.
And finally, Carmen, what's your take on this? One challenge, and one opportunity that you foresee for the future?
I think I can only second what Thomas and Patrick were saying. I think that the main challenge lies in the cost and implementation, the whole difficulties in the process of gathering this information at the moment, and what Thomas said, I really like it, to get out of the head of the companies. If they use technology and AI, they will only need to push one button and the whole report is ready. That's not going to happen, and there is a challenge behind getting to this report. But the opportunities are there, and I mentioned that earlier, having more transparency, being able to make better management decisions, and and I'm citing a good friend now and she said we need to come from CSRD reporting to CSRD performance. So it's in the end, it's about improving what's there and really taking it step by step, even though maybe the effort now seems quite high.
Great. Thank you. Thank you everyone for the discussion. I actually wanted to we just have a few minutes, but I wanted to cover some of the questions that have been asked in the Q&A. Not sure if it's a problem for you also maybe to take a couple minutes, let's say over time, to cover some of those questions. But for the other questions, we will come back to you. I mean, some of the questions are anonymous, but we might add more information in the future to what we just discussed so that we can also cover these questions. I guess the first one, it's about there is something about the evolving nature of ESG criteria and reporting requirements. And Carmen, I think, unfortunately, I have to ask that to you. So we talked about, the scope is really broad, also touching on non-European companies. What about the pace of change of these regulations? I mean, it seems like new requirements, new information are being added over time. How can companies and also auditors keep up with these changes?
I mean, it's definitely, there is quite a lot happening at the moment, but it relates a bit to what I just said, taking it step by step. We all need to be clear of the fact that next year, or so when the 50,000 companies will report over 2025, that we won't have 50,000 perfect reports. It's just not going to happen, and it's just not possible to happen. And to see that as a way of, we are transparent, we are on our way, and we try to fit all of the requirements in step by step, and we need to be transparent maybe where we have something implemented not at the right time and need to write another policy and so on. And a notion to the question as well for companies especially lies within the materiality analysis. That's the key point of where you can decide on what to report, and you should definitely use it wisely also to report not on the things which are not material to you. So really have a robust materiality analysis, and also try to, and I don't say try to leave out information which is material to your company, but really use that wisely on deciding on what to report and on what not to report. That will definitely be the main driver of the effort you have afterwards.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to that point of be prepared, because it's not, the auditor doesn't need to do everything when you don't have that data. You need to prepare in advance, right? There is another question in the chat or in the Q&A. I think this is more for Patrick, about, you mentioned you support also smaller companies as we discussed, but these companies usually don't have a lot of data to start with. So how do you deal with that at AssuranceLab?
Yeah, and I don't want to limit this to AssuranceLab. I think it's any auditor working with companies of a certain or kind of under a certain size. I mean, you won't be dealing with the mandatory requirements, so anything that you report will be voluntary for the most part. Kind of so in that case, the way we work with clients is kind of on a criteria base. So what controls do we want to report on, and then it's kind of the differences here. We're providing an auditor attestation report, which is to say we scope in where we believe there's relevancy, we align them to a standard, and we have pre-built, and I'd love to actually speak with Tomas offline here in terms of how do we come together with Briink to really kind of turbocharge our existing framework with Briink's technology, but the frameworks are flexible for companies under a certain size, because you're providing an auditor attestation report on the controls that you believe are most important for your business. So we're supporting companies in identifying kind of based, and we do map it, of course, to some of your kind of global standards, but then we produce an audited report with the client to say yes, that these controls for a certain period are operating effectively. So the key thing is working with that flexibility, and of course that is grounded in the data that you have available within your organization at the time. And we are always pressing organizations to kind of start to work with really kind of build a better data picture for their business, and even if they don't have that today, how do they do that with companies like Briink, and really kind of from a tech-led approach.
Yeah, and maybe going back to Briink, someone was asking, can you give a practical example of how you help, or how the tool is, or the let's say the tools or the underlying AI models are currently being utilized in the assurance process? Can you give us a very practical, real life example of that, Tomas? You're muted.
So I think probably the most practical and most probably relevant for where the biggest demand is at the moment is you can use the Briink solution, for example, to take that long list of CSRD KPIs, right? All of the 1,200 or so that have been released by the regulators, and in the Briink platform, you can we've basically built templates around those requirements, and then you can run them over all of your documents, for example, that you have within your company, and you can use it already to do a readiness assessment, right? So going back to, for example, what Patrick was saying, right? A lot of companies are likely not going to have a lot of the information at the moment with respect to the CSRD, but you can already use the Briink solution, for example, take that long list of questions, maybe start to do a breakdown of which ones are the most material to you, at least from an initial perspective. Dump in, just upload. You can upload all of your documents in one go, right? You can just drag and drop. You can upload a whole bunch of them in one go, and use our AI models to do an initial screening of where do you actually have information with respect to these KPIs? Where might there be information missing? So this could be used also by auditors for audit readiness purposes, but also you can kind of use it as a roadmap essentially to see, okay, where should I maybe start to invest some time in the coming months and years before I become, for example, swamped with additional reporting requirements. So that's one of the practical ways that you can use the Briink platform at the moment in quite an easy and intuitive way.
Yeah, and I think that kind of maybe partially answers to one of the questions, which was about if there are already some AI tools for the development of internal regulation methods, principles, to have them ready to be audited. So I guess this is asking about the business side and auditor readiness side of things. And I mean, I can also say a few words about that. So for the development of internal regulations, so I guess you're talking about voluntary ESG frameworks that you want to develop. We don't have that, but yeah, you can definitely, for example, take existing regulation, and as a business, you can use technology like Briink to map, I guess, your current documents, to find gaps in those documents, and to see already, to kind of do this pre-assessment of your documents and policies, to see already what potentially gaps there could be, and that can make you ready for a future auditing. So yeah, but if you're interested in the development of, so I guess the generation of frameworks or something like that, this is not something we do, but maybe, yeah, interesting to speak with you and to understand a little bit better what you mean by that. Great. Yeah, I think we're at time, just 2 minutes over. Sorry, everybody, for taking 2 minutes more, but it was such a pleasure having you here today. And I hope it was an interesting conversation for everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to share again, the webinar has been recorded, so I will be sharing it with you. And again, thank you very much to all of our panelists for participating. This was super interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.